grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. It's time for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Matt McPeek here with the Week 10 edition of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. I am very proud to bring in two new faces to the podcast. I'm joined by Steve and Robin. How you guys doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
No problem, man.
Very well, Matt. Thank you for having us to your humble abode over here.
So how long have you guys been playing fantasy football for? Why do you play this awesome game that we all love?
I've been playing, I guess, for what year is it? 2018. So I guess since 2012, I think.
Okay, cool.
So 6 years. Why do I play it?
Yeah, why do you play?
Makes life more fun.
It sure does. Amen to that. What about you, Robin?
So I have been playing fantasy football for just going on, I want to say 9 years now, since I was in the high school days. Started because I didn't want to be left out, of course, as many of you out there, how you got into fantasy football. But then as the Panthers, my hometown team from North Carolina, had some rough years, it was always good to live vicariously through some other players. So
I hear that because I'm a Jets fan, so I'm right there with you.
So that kept me sticking around for sure.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, like I said, welcome to the podcast. I'm happy I got you guys on. I know, Steve, we've been trying to get you on because you're a multiple leaguer guy, and I know when bye weeks come around, it's a real pain in the ass for somebody that's in as many leagues as me and you both are. So, again, welcome, guys. I want to start the part one of this episode just telling everybody how we're going to go through it. Again, we're going to do our Cheers to You, Pour One Out segment, which has become a staple, and we're probably going to be doing it every episode because it's fun. So then we're going to do the daily fantasy stuff. Adam's unfortunately unable to join us today, but I put together a lineup of guys that I think have some pretty awesome value and that I think can help win you a couple bucks this weekend. So we'll check that out. We'll talk a little bit about trades, about some trades that the three of us are in or that we're in the middle of processing, and we'll look at some of the players that were traded in the NFL over these past couple weeks and see how they've affected their team and what their outlook is for the rest of the season. And then we're going to run down all the guys that are on bye this week, and me and Steve are going to go through some of the bye week replacements that we have and some guys that maybe you can grab on the waiver wire. And then obviously we're going to go into the Thursday night preview along with the rest of these. It's a set of three NFC South teams visiting AFC North teams. And then we'll finish up with the Redskins at the Bucs. And then obviously part two, we'll be talking all the rest of the game. So we're going to start off with the Cheers to You, Pour One Out segment. And my first Cheers to You is Julio Jones, who finally caught a touchdown, boys. That was pretty sweet to see. Him and Keenan Allen, who was my next Cheers to You. Still waiting on those touchdowns, man. But first 100-yard game for Keenan Allen since week one, which is awesome to see. All those touchdowns seem to be going to all these wide receiver 2 and 3s on the Chargers, but I'll take 100-yard games all day. Another wide receiver that I'm cheersing to this week is Maurice Harris with the Redskins, with 4 wide receivers on IR, including Paul Richardson. Maurice last week came out, caught 10 of 12 targets for 124 yards, and he was tackled twice within the 5-yard line. So could have had a touchdown, could have easily had 2 touchdowns. So it could be in for another big week this week with Jamison Crowder still questionable. Have to keep an eye on him. They have a great matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are just absolutely
garbage,
horrible against everyone.
Yep.
So I want to cheers to both of the Browns running backs because this has become one of the more like clear-cut group of backs in the NFL. You got Nick Chubb, who's getting all the run, and Duke Johnson, who hopefully will be getting all the pass. Hugh Jackson had been saying for weeks before he got fired that he wanted to get Duke Johnson more involved. And what do you know? The week that he gets fired, they do just that. He caught 9 of his 9 targets for 78 yards and a touchdown. Instant RB2 to me, like in a PPR league, a dude that's going to catch 9 passes a week. It's pretty awesome. And Nick Chubb, again, getting all the work. 2 weeks in a row coming into this game with 18 carries and then 22 carries last week. So he's getting all the work there. So cheers to both of you, Browns running backs. You guys are great. Another one is Mike Davis, who came in for Chris Carson. He left last week with a hip injury, and Mike Davis stepped in with 15 carries for 62 yards. And if you look at the games that that Mike Davis has played really well in, last time the Seahawks played the Rams, the two of them combined for 31 attempts, 184 yards, and a touchdown. So if Davis is the only healthy running back on that team, and he gets all that work, get ready for a big game, I think he's going to be awesome. And the last time that Carson didn't play, where it was Mike Davis, starting the game, and he was the back throughout the whole game, he had 21 attempts for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. So if he's getting the majority of the work, he's good. So if he's somehow survives your waiver wire, definitely go out and grab him.
Could be a DFS option too.
He is definitely a DFS option, and we will get to that next, my man. My last cheers to you is freaking Nick Mullins, who the Raiders made him look like Joe Montana. And, he's like, how many times do you see a third-string quarterback come out and throw 3 touchdown passes on Thursday Night Football? It's pretty awesome. So I'm cheersing to you, man.
How bad are the Raiders?
The Raiders are pretty bad, man. They are pretty bad.
Like, I as an Eagles fan, I didn't think it could get worse than Chip Kelly. After, he had a good first year at least, but after that, he's getting rid of players, like
very good players.
Like,
yeah,
it's released Bruce Irvin. Amari Cooper's gone. I don't know what is going on.
They need those draft picks to hit every single one of them, or else in 3 years everyone's going to be calling for his head if they aren't already. So we're going to start the pour one out segment with Tariq Cohen, who was on last week as well. Another bad game. He only had 6 carries and 2 targets. He gave you a total of 13 yards on those 7 touches. That's not very good.
Yeah, it hurt me personally. I'm not very happy with him.
Yeah, you had Tariq in one of your lineups?
I did, yeah, unfortunately. And my one lineup, the one that goes the furthest back, my biggest money league, yeah, I'm starting to reconsider his position on my team for sure.
Were you flexing him, or you had him in an RB?
Unfortunately, I flexed him. We'll talk about a trade that I made a little bit later in the podcast that kind of changed that situation slightly. But
cool.
Yeah, unfortunately,
I just traded him as well.
Oh, nice. Selling high.
Did you trade him?
Unfortunately, I'm still stuck with him. He will not be in my flex next week.
He's getting on the bench. The next one is this Raheem Mostert, who was just this like flash in the pan. He was looking really good last week. He had 7 carries and had 86 yards and a touchdown, and then he destroyed his arm, and he's now out for the season. So that really sucks for him. So I'm pouring one out to him. But on the other hand, you gotta be cheersing to Breida and Alfred Morris. Now it's definitely just the two of them. A couple weeks ago, or at least in the beginning of the season, we were kind of trying to figure out which one was going to be, the better ad, and Raheem Mostert came and kind of screwed it all up. So at least we know now that it's definitely just the two of them. The next one is Mike Evans, who I don't know if it was a combination of Robin, of your boy with Bradbury. Your shutdown
New
corner.
number 24, Thieves Ave, baby.
Or if it was just Ryan Fitzpatrick overthrowing every single pass that he threw. But Mike Evans only caught 1 of his 10 targets for 16 yards. He was a major disappointment for me. I was very excited about his reunion with Fitzpatrick, and it just did not work out. So I'm pouring one out to you, Mike Evans. The next one is Kenyon Drake, who it's just like week after week, he just takes another punch to the gut. He only got 3 carries to Frank Gore's 20. It's just like, but somehow he stays relevant because he's used in the pass game, and he gives you enough to give you hope that you shouldn't drop him. But it's just
sometimes hope is a very dangerous thing.
Yes, it is. And the last one is Mark Ingram, who's another 2 weeks in a row, kind of a disappointment. He only had 10 touches and had 36 yards. He had a huge fumble and was not on the goal line at all in the several goal line situations that the Saints were in. He was not on the field. So definitely pouring one out to Mark Ingram as well. Got to get him a little more involved, but how do you do that when you have Alvin Kamara on your team, So the next thing here is our daily fantasy spot. I know some people aren't playing daily fantasy yet, but if you're a fantasy football player, this stuff is awesome. It's a lot of fun. I won like $10 last week playing a Cam Newton, Greg Olsen stack. And I also had Duke Johnson in my lineup as well, and did pretty well. So it's a pretty awesome feeling when you get these hunches in the middle of the week, and you sit there and you build a lineup, and Sunday rolls around and you just see the ticker at the bottom of the screen say, your guy just scored, your guy just scored, your guy just scored. It's awesome, man. So if you're not playing yet, you got to get on this. It's great. So my quarterback is Cam Newton. I'm riding him again. $8,700 for a top flight QB. The Steelers allow the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Cam is in my quarterback spot again. For running backs, I got Kareem Hunt. Yeah, he costs a lot, $9,000, but the Cardinals' run defense is the worst in the league. So I'm paying up for Kareem Hunt. And my next one is I'm riding Duke Johnson again, $5,600. To me, he's like the definition of a super value. Atlanta allows the most receptions and the 3rd most receiving yards to running backs. And as we just saw last week, that's what Duke Johnson does. So to me, that's like the best value you can get at running backs, $5,600 for a dude who is definitely going to get some work. For a wide receiver, I'm looking at Jarvis Landry for $6,400. Again, Atlanta's defense is putrid. They also give up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So Jarvis for mid-level, $6,400 is pretty good. Keenan Allen's the wide receiver that I'm paying up for between the volume that he's always got and just hoping that maybe this is the week that he finally scores another touchdown. If maybe Julio's starting that streak. So I'm hoping Keenan Allen can pay off for me. And then another just ridiculous value here is Marquez Valdez-Scantling for $5,400. He is now the wide receiver 2 in Green Bay. So I don't know if there's really anything else you need to say. $5,400 for a receiver that's catching passes from Aaron Rodgers is pretty awesome.
He's good too.
He is good.
It's not just like it's not like they're just throwing someone out there. Like I watched the game. He can like go up and get it.
Yeah, man. He's high pointing balls. He's out running dudes. I actually got a pretty awesome stat to drop on our Packers preview, but I saw that Geronimo Allison was out last week, and Sunday morning I went up and grabbed him, and he got me, I think it was 12 points in my full point PPR, so it's pretty awesome, pick up and throw in your flex spot when you got a whole bunch of dudes on bye, so hoping he can keep that going. At tight end for me, I'm going with Greg Olsen again, Robin.
Let's go, baby. Boys. You're riding heavy with the Panthers. That's what I like to hear.
This is called the Panthers stack. You assume
you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
You assume if Greg Olsen's going to catch a touchdown, it's going to be from Cam, so you might as well get the points at both spots.
Of course.
So Greg Olsen's for $6,500. He's one of the more expensive tight ends this week, but the gap between top tier tight ends and middle tier tight ends it's very big. And the Steelers also allow the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. So Greg Olsen should capitalize again. And in my flex is another awesome value, considering his matchup, Dion Lewis for $5,800. He looked great last week. He led the team in receiving yards, rushing attempts. He is the focal point of that offense, I feel like. And the Patriots allow the 7th most receptions and the 4th most receiving yards to running backs. So obviously that is Dion Lewis's gig. And of course it is a revenge game. So that's always fun. And then for defense, $4,700 for the Chargers is pretty awesome, considering that the Chargers, they've allowed less than 20 points in their last 4 games, and they've had 5 interceptions and 14 sacks over those 4 games. And the last time that they played the Raiders, who they're playing this week, they allowed 10 points, had an interception, a fumble recovery, and 3 sacks. So that's a pretty awesome stat line for a DST for sure. So there's my daily fantasy lineup. Those are guys that I'm excited about watching. A lot of them aren't in any of my leagues, and that's one of the best parts about daily fantasy is that you get to play dudes who aren't in your regular roster, or if you're in a team that's 3-7 or whatever the hell you are at this point, may as well pack it in. But daily fantasy is always there, so it's pretty fun. So why don't we talk a little here about trades, boys? So Robin, you were saying you had an interesting trade going on involving Tariq Cohen, or Tariq Cohen was maybe going to be part of it?
I did have an interesting trade. It's an implication because of Tariq Cohen, actually. So Tariq Cohen directly has nothing to do, but has everything to do indirectly. So I needed a new running back pretty badly. I was in a desperate situation in one of my 10-man full PPR auction leagues. So both auction for the draft as well as auction waiver wire, $100 budget. So pickings are very slim. And that's when I realized that one of my good buddies from Atlanta, Georgia, was in the market for a wide receiver, and he had Leonard Fournette sitting on his bench. So I decided to try and go for that trade straight up, even though Calvin Ridley has been one of my top producing receivers this year in a full-point PPR league. I was not happy to get rid of him, but I had to bite at the chance to use an Atlanta fanboys fandom to try and get Leonard Fournette.
Hell yeah, man.
He accepted the trade, so now I've got a few scaries there. I am kind of nervous that Leonard Fournette could either see his third injury of the season and not get too much playtime this year, in which case I just gave up pretty much 14 to 20 free points a game. I mean, Calvin Ridley's been having an unbelievable year, but I needed the running back. Sometimes it just comes down to the positional needs, and I got Leonard Fournette. I'm going to put him in my flex this week. I'm not super excited about it, but he practiced Monday. He seems pretty healthy. I think he's going to get, I would guess right around 10 to 14 carries if we're lucky, if he doesn't see any setbacks early on. That's me obviously being hopeful on that one. But yeah, I'm excited to have Leonard Fournette. I mean, that's a potential first-round running back for a receiver I picked up after week 1 off the waiver wire. So feel good about it. Definitely a little bit scared. I don't know if any of you guys out there have been trying to trade for Leonard or have Leonard on your bench, but he's definitely an interesting player right now. So there's a lot of trade value either if you have him or if you want a running back for cheaper than you could get elsewhere. I think it's really interesting.
Any top 10 running back coming back from injury who hasn't played in weeks, definitely. I feel like it's really hard to quantify the value there. But I think that was a great trade on your part, especially if you have the depth at wide receiver. Why not go for him? The only thing that would concern me about going for Leonard Fournette right now is the fact that they did just go out and get Carlos Hyde. So there's obviously 3 running backs that need the work, and I don't know if they're going to, give Leonard Fournette the same amount of work that he would normally get. Obviously, coming off an injury is probably not the best idea for them to do that. But in a couple weeks, I think, he could easily win your league if he comes in and shows for 2 weeks that his leg's fine, the hamstring's not bothering anymore, and they go, okay, let's give this guy his normal 20 carry, 25 touch workload, and he produces like he did last year. I think he can definitely win you a league, man. So good, good on you for attacking that fandom. That's the strategy of fantasy football, man. You go after dudes who are probably going to value somebody a little bit more than they should, but it's not like you're ripping them off. Calvin Ridley's been awesome, just like you were saying, and especially in a full point PPR league. He's definitely getting a good trade. I think both sides are going to be happy with the trade.
Yeah, I think so. I'm taking slightly more risk, as you said, and I'm hoping they just give him a few red zone carries, so hopefully he can pop off on a touchdown, because I don't see anything close to a 100-yard game coming in his first few games. Mm-hmm. But I'm really backing on the side that he'll get one of those red zone carries and hopefully get in the end zone. We'll see.
For sure. Steve, you got any trades in the works right now?
Well, to Robin's, I guess, conversely, to your point, I had TJ Yeldon a couple weeks ago, and they traded for Carlos Hyde, and Leonard Fournette's hurt, and TJ Yeldon was putting up RB1 numbers.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
I mean, catching it, running it. So I got rid of him for somebody who owned Leonard Fournette, and I was able to pry Keenan Allen away for TJ Yeldon, which is looking like a couple weeks ago. So it's looking like a steal at this point. Keenan Allen's going to get those catches, week in and week out.
This is a full point PPR you were saying?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
so
that is a steal, man. Damn, we got 2 good traders in the
love
house
it.
here.
I'm not normally on this side of the deal, so we'll hope. I still could go south, but yours sounds a lot better than my gamble on Fournette.
Yeah,
this guy sounds like he just overreacted to a couple of bad games by Keenan Allen.
Yeah,
to me.
Yeah, and he owned Fournette, so
it made sense for him.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. So, another one I kind of forgot about, and then it's just popping back in my head now. I traded. Somebody offered this to me. I didn't even do any of the work for this. I had Alshon Jeffrey and Tariq Cohen. So he offered DeAndre Hopkins for Alshon Jeffrey and Tariq Cohen. He was very very slim at running back.
Is this an Eagles fan?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
I mean, I didn't want to get rid of Alshon, but I mean, DeAndre Hopkins like 10
man.
catches a game. So
Yeah, preying on that fandom.
I was actually today at work. I started a league at my job, and I was talking to the DeAndre Hopkins owner in my league just today. He actually also owns Dalvin Cook and Cam Newton, who has like just an absolute beautiful schedule for the rest of the season. So I really want to get as much of those three players as I can from him. He's I think 3-5 or he's 4-5 or whatever it is. So he's he needs a win. So hopefully we can figure something out with him. But another guy that I'm in discussions with right now, he has Amari Cooper, and I'm not thin at receiver, but I am really counting on Cooper Kupp as my third wide receiver right now. And with that knee injury that he had, I kind of want to bolster up my fourth wide receiver on that team, who right now is Doug Baldwin, who hasn't really been playing all that well. So I'm trying to pick up Amari Cooper, who I think is just fine as a fourth wide receiver, because I think he's going to be. I don't think he's going to be a world beater with the Cowboys, but I think he's going to be a very good wide receiver too. At least in fantasy football for us, he's definitely going to be their wide receiver one. But and so he needs a running back. So I'm trying to pawn off Alex Collins to him, because it's just every week it's there's nothing more frustrating this season to me than Alex Collins. It's like whether it's the beginning of the season when we had the fullback dives with Buck Allen, or now in the middle of the season now he's kind of been fumbling in the past couple games. Last week he didn't have a fumble, thank God. But and that's kind of been like his bugaboo, I guess, throughout his short career so far. And then now with them trading for Ty Montgomery, I don't know how that's going to affect Alex Collins, but I just want to move him. So he scored a touchdown last week. I'm trying to sell high on him, and if I can get myself, if I can bolster up my wide receiver depth, I'll gladly do that. So that's something I'm going for as far as trades. But so we got 4 teams on bye this week, and there's a couple good ones. The Texans and the Vikings are very fantasy relevant. You got plenty of big time names in the fantasy world, such as DeAndre Hopkins, who we were just talking about. But when you look at the Vikings, obviously, Kirk Cousins, Latavius Murray, or Dalvin Cook. And then you have the 2 big-time receivers, Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen. And their tight end is definitely rostered right now. So people are going to have to replace Kyle Rudolph. You look at the Texans with Deshaun Watson, Lamar Miller, DeAndre Hopkins. And I'm sure some people have been riding Alfred Blue in maybe those 12-team full-point PPR leagues, or even Demaryius Thomas, and maybe even Kiki QT. And then you look at the Broncos, Phillip Lindsay and Emmanuel Sanders, two very fantasy relevant players. And then with the Ravens, like I said, Alex Collins. I didn't really highlight any of their wide receivers because they've just all been so inconsistent. I'm hoping nobody has to rely on any of those wide receivers. But
John Brown's had a pretty good year.
He has. It's just he kind of fell off the table a little bit after a really hot start for sure. But so Steve, do you have any of those guys that I just mentioned from the Ravens, Broncos, Texans, or Vikings? How many of those guys you got on your teams? Who are you replacing them with? And if you had any one of those a tough decision that you had to figure out who you were going to replace them with?
Yeah. So I'm realizing that. So I'm in 5 leagues, and I'm realizing that I have a lot of Vikings. I don't know why.
Because they're a good offense,
I guess. But I have in one league it's a 10-team PPR, no tight end required. So
you can still play one in a flex, but you don't have to start.
Yeah,
one.
So it's quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, and then a receiver flex. Okay. So not a running back, you can be a wide receiver or a tight end. And I have the Cousins, Stephon Diggs stack in that league. So I have a couple options for quarterback. I can go Andy Dalton against the Saints. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking potentially Alex Smith against the Bucs, who the Bucs can't stop anyone. I think Alex Smith's going to have a pretty good day because I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball. And I'll get to that in the Redskins Bucs preview. But,
cool.
So I guess Andy Dalton. I'm leaning Andy Dalton against the New Orleans Saints. They're probably going to put up points against them. He's going to have to come from behind.
And AJ Green.
And then I have Diggs. So in that league, I can go. Diggs was my my flex, so I can go Gronkowski, which is I guess what I'm probably going to do if he's healthy. I can go Randall Cobb, Cole Beasley, but Gronkowski is not.
Yeah, he has been playing all that well.
Yeah, very unfortunate. So those are my options there. I have Diggs in another league, and I can go Baldwin, Josh Gordon, or Randall Cobb.
Josh Gordon.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right. That kind of segues me in here as well. I've got
Okay,
a Josh
good.
Gordon scenario, but no, I didn't want to steal your thunder. If you got some more notes, but I'll bring up my Josh Gordon scenario here in a minute. It's we're in the same boat.
And then I wrote down the Vikings D. I have the Vikings D in two teams.
Okay, yeah.
In two leagues.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
And defense is so hard because you don't know who's. It's very league specific. Who's on the waiver wire in your league could be completely different than who's on the waiver wire somewhere else. But I was able to pick up the Chargers.
And the Vikings D has not been playing the same as they were last year by any stretch.
Yeah.
So
They had a big game last week though. Won me a couple games?
Were you thinking at all about dropping them, or
I didn't. I wanted to keep them because I feel like they're going to round into form.
Yeah.
Shortly. But yeah, so those are the options. I have two Texans in my leagues. I have a DeAndre Hopkins, who I just traded for, and I can replace him with Larry Fitzgerald, who I think
what you got to do, right?
Might have a good game against.
Did you realize that DeAndre was on bye when you traded for him?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
And I couldn't pass it up.
All right, yeah.
So
that was an awesome trade.
The Cardinals are against the Chiefs, so they're gonna have to throw the ball. What's the line in that game? 16.5. Wow. Okay, yeah. So the Cardinals will be playing from behind.
Yeah, I'm looking at just some of these players that you could hopefully still pick up off the waiver wire if they're still available. MVS, like I said earlier, Marcus Valdez-Scantling and Maurice Harris, two guys that we were talking about in the Cheers to You section. I think they're awesome pickups if they're still available for you. And at running back, like I said, Duke Johnson and Mike Davis, they both have great matchups. And as you're saying, Alex Smith, I think, is a worthy free agent pickup this week if you're one of these guys that's trying to replace Kirk Cousins or Deshaun Watson. If you've been a team that's been only rostering one quarterback, I think Alex Smith with that matchup in Tampa Bay is not the worst you can do on the waiver wire this week. So let's get into our first game here, which is the Thursday night football game. Robin, your hometown Panthers are playing the Steelers. We got the Steelers D, they're really good against the run, but they're not very good against anything else. So, both teams are in the top 5 for the fewest receiving yards and receptions allowed to running back. So, how do you see this game going with your Panthers, man?
To be totally honest, I of course see a Panthers victory coming out of this one. That is not biased. I'd like to hear y'all's opinions and y'all's differing takes on this. But both the Panthers and the Steelers are clearly playing extremely well. I think the Steelers are on a 5-game win streak now. Panthers are on a 3. So both of these teams are super hot. Both have hot offenses. Of course, both have big holes in our defense at certain times in the game. The Panthers, as well as some of our corners, have been playing. We even allowed the Bucs to creep back in last week and scored about 30 points and almost give us a run for their money. Luckily, their defense is absolute trash.
Fitzmagic showed up for 20 minutes.
He
and
did.
He was like, I'm done.
But it's a terrifying 20 minutes. When Fitzmagic shows up, you have no idea what's going to happen, and that's what's so scary.
You got to buckle up for
yeah, absolutely.
Fitzmagic.
It's very scary. But yeah, the Panthers' offense has just looked so incredible the last few weeks. They're so electric, so dynamic. Norv Turner and Cam Newton are absolutely meshing, and I think a lot of people forget that this edition of Norv Turner this year is really going back to the Chudzinski days. Both Norv and Chudzinski were both along with Rivera on that San Diego staff. So it's really Norv Turner's following in Chudzinski's footsteps, which was when Cam had his MVP season, was that year with Chudzinski before the Browns stole him.
Okay.
So I really think the Panthers are absolutely hitting a stride. We have DJ Moore as well as Curtis Samuel, a couple of really young electric receivers that Cam finally has some open targets. It's not just Funchess and Olsen, and outside of that, just a bunch of random scraps. So that's been really nice. So I see this being a high-scoring game, honestly, on both sides. I see Christian McCaffrey, just because I know the Steelers have a solid run defense, but the way that Christian McCaffrey runs the ball is just so much more fluid. He runs outside a lot more, and he's actually averaging 4.6 yards a game right now, which is just honestly 0.1 behind Todd Gurley out there, which is crazy. He doesn't get a lot of
That's
it.
the stat of the day right there.
It's a mind-blowing stat. Just they're averaging very similar yards per carry. Of course, you can't completely equate their value. But Christian's always gonna get you some solid yards. You're gonna look at a touchdown in there, and of course, if you have Cam has just been stacking up the fantasy points. For some reason, he's not throwing 3 interceptions a game anymore. I'm pumped about it. I'm really psyched, but that's definitely helping his fantasy value. And he's just been running all over the place. So I'm really excited about the Panthers this week. Our defense, as we discussed a little bit earlier, Thieves Ave, as Josh Norman named them before he left, has been I don't know what the word is, reclaimed, I guess, by the corners, by Bradbury, as well as Dante Jackson out of LSU this year, who's having a potential Defensive Rookie of the Year season there at cornerback. He's having a phenomenal year at his first interception to the Panthers this week. So I think our cornerbacks are really terrifying. Our D-line showed with Fitzpatrick last week. He just had no time to get it to Evans whatsoever. So our D-line has been rushing the quarterback pretty well. The sacks don't indicate it, but the quarterbacks have no time. So, again, the Steelers are a very scary team. I'm not excited. Let me go to the flip side of the coin. I was keeping that very biased there.
I thought this was a Panthers podcast.
Yeah, right there for a second. You bring me on, I get excited. But yeah, I'm terrified.
We need that Panthers roar drop right there.
Keep
sure.
pounding.
Yeah, I'm always ready to keep pounding. But Big Ben at home is always terrifying, no matter how hot your team is. It's ridiculous the difference in play you get from him in Pittsburgh as opposed to when he's traveling. But yeah, James Conner, of course, he's going to put up big points again this week. I can see him getting into the end zone at least twice. Our red zone defense has been pretty abysmal as of late. We either get them 3 and out or they score a touchdown almost every drive. So anytime they get in the red zone, I'm pretty terrified here. But again, I think we're gonna hold the receivers down. Antonio Brown, of course, I don't have to tell you to start him, but I don't think he's gonna have a great week. I think if you're incredibly heavy at wide receiver, we're gonna be able to afford to double up on him and send our safeties his way all game. So I don't think he's gonna have a phenomenal week, but of course you'd have to be probably an idiot not to start him.
Do you think Mike Evans' horrible game last week was more on Bradbury's coverage or that awesome defensive line that you were telling me that you were just talking about putting pressure on Fitzpatrick?
I would have to say it was the defensive line, just because being interdivisional, Bradbury sees Mike Evans twice a year, and Mike Evans puts up considerably high numbers on Bradbury every year, every matchup. Again, this week, Bradbury did play well, and of course our safeties did a good job of also supplying double coverage on Mike, but there weren't really even that many close calls where Bradbury had to make great plays. He was playing solid defense, and I think he's a great corner. But I think it had a lot more to do with Fitzpatrick having just no time to get it to him. And I think Fitzpatrick, as we've seen, he likes to throw that long ball. He likes to let his routes develop a little bit more, and he needs that time a little bit more than Jameis might, where he can get that ball out pretty quick.
Good point.
So I think that had something to do with it, and maybe they'll settle in, maybe they'll adjust, but that could be a huge factor.
Yeah, hopefully for your James Conner owners, hopefully Le'Veon doesn't play in this game because I mean, it's even if he does, I can't see him getting any more than 5. It's Wednesday, and he wasn't in practice, so I really don't see him just showing up on Friday and being like, "Hey, I'm ready to play, coach." Like,
are they really just gonna give him like James Conner's been tearing it
exactly?
up? Like, are they really just gonna stop?
Yeah, there's no way they just go, "Here you go, here's all your carries back."
I mean, I understand he's Le'Veon Bell, but
not without a full week of practice, though.
At
I mean, that's just straight up
practice.
disrespectful to Connor, let alone on the actual side of him easing back into the playbooks, learning the differences. I mean, I don't even think Le'Veon's reached out to the front office yet, so he has no idea any of the changes they've made to the playbook yet.
Yeah, he's just keeping him on ice, and he's just going to show up one day. Like, there's no way.
It's kind of a baller power move.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty badass, but at the same time, for James Conner owners, like, it's got to be like this thing that just looms in the back of your head, but have confidence because this dude has been playing awesome all season. So We were kind of talking a little bit before the podcast about potentially trading him. If I had him, I'm not trading him for anything, or not. I wouldn't say for anything, but you'd have to give me a lot for him because he's just been playing so well, and I don't think the Steelers are just gonna, up and change everything because Le'Veon decides he wants to come back. So the thing I'm looking for in this matchup is the tight ends. So the Panthers and the Steelers are both in the top 4 for most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So whether that's Jesse James and Vance McDonald for the Steelers, or obviously Greg Olsen, who's been playing really well. Like I said, I have him in my FanDuel lineup for a reason. So I'm looking at the tight ends in this matchup for sure. So, Robin, this past weekend we were at a Halloween party, which was a lot of fun. Shout out to our friends Julia and Alex, an impromptu engagement party it became.
Congrats to them.
And we were talking about Curtis Samuel, and this was on Saturday night. This was before Sunday, and you were telling me how versatile this dude is, and how he's really been improving, and how the team, how you think he could be more used in the same way Tyreek Hill is used. And what do you know? He came out and had 2 touchdowns, one of them on a double reverse for 33 yards, and another one on, what was it, like a 15, 20-yard catch. He was only targeted 4 times, but he caught 2 of them, and like I said, 2 touchdowns. So hell of a call on your side there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this Curtis Samuel dude and what made you come up with that take?
For sure. So Curtis Samuel's always been an interesting player. He came out of Ohio State. Last year was his rookie year, but he had an injury early in the season. We didn't get to see any regular season snaps out of him. But he actually, at Ohio State, he ran a little bit of the Wildcats, as well as playing both running back and wide receiver. So the Panthers picked him up as just an electric playmaker. Didn't get to see much out of him last year, but earlier in this preseason, earlier in this year, we've gotten to see a few really exciting dynamic plays, a lot of sweeps. Again, you said, as you mentioned, it was against the double option yesterday.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Or this weekend, rather, when they ran the double option. And if you take a look at the actual run, it's one of those runs where he actually ended up running, I think it was close to 108 yards for 33 yards of actual gain. He was zigzagging back and forth across the field. I think it was 5 missed tackles, 2 of which were broken. And you can just watch him, and Tyreek Hill is always who he's reminded me of, even before he's had any of these big touchdown runs. He's just so elusive with the ball, and he's so intentional in every single step that he makes. He's incredibly electric, and he's only owned in, I think, 2% of leagues right now. So there's almost no ownership with him. And that is indicative of the Panthers' many, many weapons, and I can understand anybody's apprehension to put him in their starting lineup. But he's a guy that you want to keep a very serious eye on, because as Cam starts to see him emerge as another very quick, speedy target who has breakout potential, I think he's going to have an incredible year, both running sweeps and just going for these long balls that Devin Funchess just isn't quite quick enough to get to.
And as you mentioned, North Turner's been doing a hell of a job as their offensive coordinator there. And maybe he sees all these younger coaches running all these crazy jet sweep type plays and, shovel passes and all this other stuff. Maybe he says, we got a dude that we can do that with too. So I was thoroughly impressed with that call. So cheers to you, my man.
Well, thank you. I was excited it came to fruition.
Yeah.
It's helped the Panthers.
So let us get into another one of these NFC South versus AFC North games with the Saints going to Cincinnati to play the Bengals and their atrocious defense. They're giving up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks and tight ends, and they're in the top 3 for most fantasy points allowed to running backs and receivers. So basically, any Saint that you have on your team, you should start them. And even if that includes the newly signed Dez Bryant throwing up the X all day, at first, when I heard that they had brought in Dez and Brandon Marshall on a workout to, obviously they're interested in signing one of them, right? Why would you bring them in if you weren't going to sign them? So they came in, and at first I was like, this kind of sucks. I'm a Michael Thomas owner in 2 of my leagues, and I don't want someone else that's going to take away targets from Michael Thomas. I already have a pain in the ass named Taysom Hill taking away targets and red zone plays and everything from everybody else on the Saints. But, Michael Thomas had 15 targets last week. So it's pretty much him and Alvin Kamara, and that's it, right? Especially if Mark Ingram isn't going to be playing like he did last year. Still kind of waiting for him to come on. But, Do I think Dez is going to be an all of a sudden become a number 1 or 2 receiver? No, I don't. But do I think he can have some kind of value for you in a full point PPR league? Because I don't see him catching many passes. So the passes that he does catch, they're going to have to be, he's going to have to get some points on his yardage and touchdowns. But the Saints love to run these wide receiver bubble screens on the goal line, and they love to do it with Michael Thomas. So if you put Dez Bryant in there as the point man for blocking on those kind of plays, Dez Bryant is a beast, man. We can talk about his speed and how much he likes to run his mouth, and maybe we can talk about his route running, but he's a big dude. So having him as a blocking wide receiver, I think, is definitely going to be awesome for them. So it's a 1-year deal. It's good for both of them. Gives Dez an opportunity to show the league that he can still play, and it gives Saints another weapon, and it gives somebody to maybe take away some pressure off of Michael Thomas, that he doesn't have to be targeted 15 times, and go for 200 yards in order for them to win a game. But I mean, you look at these Saints, you're obviously going to start every single one of them. They're all, in the top 10 at their position. At least we're talking Breeze, Kamara, and Michael Thomas. Maybe Ingram, this is a get-right game for him. Hopefully he can take advantage of this horrible Bengals defense, and maybe they try and get him going a little more after him having 2 games where he was not very good at all. And look for Michael Thomas to continue to be a beast. I mean, just because they signed Dez Bryant doesn't mean you should expect any less than Michael Thomas. Maybe even less work will do better for him. We saw he did have a couple huge plays, but he also had a couple plays where it was just, a 5-yard slant and gets tackled. So maybe changing up the routes that he can run and keeping him on one side of the field maybe will do him good. So I'm pretty excited about any Saints that I have on any of my teams, and I think anybody who has a Saint on your team, you should be pretty excited too. You're looking at these Bengals; they're coming off of a bye. We were talking about your options at quarterback in your one league, whether you should play Dalton or Alex Smith. To me, man, with AJ Green gone, that scares me. If you look at Andy Dalton without AJ Green, I think it was 6 career games he had without AJ Green, and I think he only scored over 15 fantasy points once. I think that was a stat. So
sounds right.
Yeah, and I mean, the Saints are very bad against wide receivers and quarterbacks, but I mean, when you can just focus on Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon, I think Andy Dalton's in for a disappointing game, who has disappointed me many times this season. In one of my leagues, I have him and Andrew Luck, and I seem to have made the wrong decision every single week with those 2 quarterbacks, which is why I hate rostering 2 quarterbacks.
You just gotta get rid of one, man.
Yeah, I know.
You gotta do it.
And this, you look at their schedules too. Andrew Luck's schedule looks abysmal, but like, how do you drop Andrew Luck though? Like, it's freaking Andrew Luck. We'll get into that when we preview the Colts game, but I think the 2 guys that are most likely going to benefit with AJ Green being out, at least in their volume, is obviously Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon. They're both 15th in their. They both rank 15th in their respective positions in half point PPR scoring. With extra targets, obviously Tyler Boyd's value goes up, and maybe they try and focus a little bit more on the run. So Mixon's touches are probably going to go up as well. So I'm worried about Andy Dalton playing without AJ Green, but then again, like I said, the matchup is not that bad with the Saints. Yeah. So why don't we go to the next game? This is the third of the NFC South versus AFC North games. We got the Falcons versus the Browns, and again, another horrible defense. Seems to be a pretty big theme down there in the NFC South. Seems like down there in the South, they only focus on offense and don't really care about the defense down there. I think the Panthers are by far and away the best defense down there.
So. We kind of take the opposite of our SEC counterparts there. We take their shiny wide receivers and then ship all their defenses to the Northeast.
That's funny. So, obviously, Matt Ryan, you're starting. Obviously, Telvin Coleman, you're starting. Julio Jones, like we said, finally caught that touchdown. You're starting him. Calvin Ridley, you're starting him. The question marks are Mohamed Sanu. I think there's somebody out there who's been struggling of whether or not to play Mohamed Sanu in your flex, and you've probably been right, hopefully, the weeks that he scored the touchdowns, and hopefully you weren't wrong on the weeks that he didn't score the touchdowns, the many weeks that he didn't score a touchdown.
Don't envy that guy making that decision every week, but good luck to you.
And I mean, Austin Hooper, who I think, because he plays in such a potent offense, he's got some flash to him, but he's been kind of disappointing too. He's been very inconsistent, hasn't really gotten in the end zone all that much. So I think the only question mark in this game is Ito Smith. He only got 10 attempts last week, but he turned them into 60 yards and a touchdown. And if this is a game where it's going to be back and forth, because the Browns defense is not all that great either. They give up the 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, but besides that, there's really nothing to speak of as far as good things for the Browns defense. So I think this could become a shootout, and I think Ito Smith could end up being used in the pass game more than he has been. So if I had him, I would consider flexing him if it's one of your more difficult decisions, stuck between him and maybe Mohamed Sanu, or you're stuck between him and one of these Browns wide receiver twos who every week it seems like there's a different wide receiver two for the Cleveland Browns. This past week it was Rashad Perriman, who I didn't even realize got released from the Ravens, I guess, over the offseason. They brought in those other 3 wide receivers, and Rashad Perriman just kind of disappeared, I guess. But yeah, he had 6 targets, which was 3rd on the team in targets. Like I said, the merry-go-round of wide receiver twos for the Cleveland Browns just keeps going. But the number 1 wide receiver is no doubt Jarvis Landry, and this is obviously an awesome matchup for him and Baker Mayfield. So definitely keep Jarvis in your Landry, keep Landry in your lineup, because I'm sure he's been in there all season. But if you're struggling at quarterback, you need a bye week replacement. He's probably another guy we should have mentioned earlier. But Baker going against the Falcons, who give up the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Great matchup for him. And then, as I said in the Cheers to You section, you got these 2 Browns running backs who have been playing great. I think you could way more than comfortably play both of them and expect good numbers from them. So I'm excited about the Browns this week, to be honest.
I think the Falcons are turning that corner. I think they won 3 in a row. They just steamrolled the Redskins.
I think it was 4 in a row, actually.
4 in a row? Well, they just blew out the Redskins. They were running whenever they wanted. The Redskins' defense isn't horrible.
They were ranked pretty good, actually, up until that game with the Falcons last week. I think they were in the bottom 10 for points allowed in like 2 or 3 different categories, and now they're only in one of those categories now because the Falcons beat them up pretty well.
Yeah, so
the Falcons are extremely electric, especially if Julio keeps scoring. Julio and
first touchdown.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
Imagine if this dude was scoring touchdowns like all these other top tier wide receivers are, not named Keenan Allen. Like he would be by far and away the number 1 receiver right now, because he's just been quietly putting together an awesome season. Just because he doesn't get numbers with the touchdowns doesn't mean he's not still a number 1 receiver for sure. So Steve, how do you see this Redskins and Buccaneers game going that we have here as the final NFC South game?
Yeah, so this game's really interesting to me. Like I said, I was just talking about the Redskins who got just blown out. I watched that whole game. The Eagles were on bye week, so
gotta watch something.
Gotta watch, NFC East rival go down in flames. It was actually a beautiful sight. But I mean, they couldn't generate a pass rush. They couldn't stop the run. Now the question is that the Falcons or is that the Redskins? Hopefully, I believe it's the Redskins. Whatever. Call me a homer. And the Bucks, they put up 30 some points against the Panthers.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about it, but yeah, in that ballpark, it's mad.
So, I mean, I think this is a good matchup for the Bucks. You got Fitz. I think he should get a little more time than he did against the Panthers. So I think, and you brought up a really good point, Robin, that I think he needs time. If he has time, he's going to pick you apart. He's going to hit Jackson deep. He's going to, find Evans for 30 yards.
Right.
OJ Howard, Chris Godwin. I don't know if you're starting those guys, but
Adam Humphries, like you were saying.
Adam
earlier.
Humphries.
Adam
There are
Humphries,
a lot of
man.
mouths to feed down there in Tampa Bay.
Did Adam Humphries have 30 points last week in full-point PPR?
Yeah.
2 touchdowns, eight catches, and a couple rushes.
80-something yards. Yeah,
Unreal.
he was great.
Yeah, so I think this is a good matchup for the Bucs. Conversely, I think this is also a good matchup for the Redskins.
Oh yeah.
They had 3 offensive linemen head to the IR this week. So what does that mean for Adrian Peterson? What does that mean for Chris Thompson? This is a big game for Chris Thompson if he's healthy.
Yeah.
They're not. I don't think they're going to be able to run it against the Bucs. The Bucs let up a lot of passing yards. They let up a lot of receptions to running backs. They let up a lot of receiving yards to running backs. They don't let up a lot of rushing yards. So I think this is a game. If Chris Thompson's healthy, start him. He could be the DFS guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then where in the world is Jordan Reed?
Hell of a
He is killing me. Vernon Davis is catching touchdowns and passes. Like, do you drop Jordan Reed and pick up Vernon Davis? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to start Jordan Reed this week. He's going to have a big game. And if he doesn't, you drop him and say, all right, whatever. Yeah. So I think this is the week. This is Jordan Reed's week. I think he could be a DFS maven because the Bucs let up a lot of yards. They let up a lot of yards to the tight ends.
3rd most fantasy points allowed to tight ends.
Yeah, so I think this is Jordan Reed's breakout week. I see this as a high-scoring affair. So if you got either side, I'm a little low on Adrian Peterson just because of the 3 offensive linemen going down. Bucs are pretty good against the run. But other than that, there's a lot of startable players in this game.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, to your point with these tight ends, I said a couple weeks ago, we've been waiting years for Jordan Reed to finally have a season, full healthy season. You know, what could this guy do if he stayed healthy? And it's such a quagmire because the dude's finally healthy and he does nothing.
Is it Alex Smith?
I don't know, man. I have no idea.
I don't know either.
He's getting the
Still
targets.
in love with Vernon Davis from their days out west.
I guess.
Can't get over it.
But he's getting the targets. He's getting the red zone work. And I mean, you look at this team, how they've been so hurt at wide receiver over the past couple weeks. As I mentioned earlier, there's 4 wide receivers on IR on that team. And one of them is Paul Richardson, and Jamison Crowder hasn't played in weeks. And, you know, you would think if their number 1 receiver, who I think we would all agree is Jamison Crowder, goes down, you would think that Jordan Reed would be next in line for all of that work, and it just hasn't been there. From the few Redskins games that I've watched this season, it doesn't seem like he looks like that. I said this a couple weeks ago. He doesn't look like that wide receiver / tight end guy that, you know, you're not going to really see him line up in line as a tight end anywhere near as much as you see him line up wide as a wide receiver because, you know, the matchup problem that he is. But it just seems like he's regressed down to a normal tight end now. He's not this uber talented guy anymore. He's just another tight end, you know. And I mean, if you drafted him, I'm sorry because you probably had a lot of big hopes for him.
Yeah, that's all right. And I think if you're desperate for a tight end, you could go Vernon Davis.
Yeah, why not, man?
I think this is gonna be a lot of passing yards.
And with all those wide receivers out, I mean, if their only healthy wide receivers are Josh Doxson and Maurice Harris, I mean, those tight ends are going to have to do something. If the Saints, if the Redskins are going to move the ball, you know, like you were saying with their running back situation with all those offensive linemen being out, I feel like they're probably going to have to lean on those tight ends. So, yeah, maybe this is the week to pick up Vernon Davis and start him, man.
Yeah, and it's not just random offensive linemen; it's Brandon Scherf and Trent Williams, who are Pro Bowlers more or less. So, I think this is Alex Smith's going to have to throw the ball, and hopefully the Bucs win.
Yeah, I'm looking at I really wanted to dive into the tight ends last week, seeing that Fitzpatrick was named the starter, and I wanted to see who he historically has targeted more between O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate, and it's obviously O.J. Howard. So I mean, if you're wondering the same thing, if you're stuck trying to pick a tight end off the waiver wire, or picking between these 2 tight ends, I think you can go with O.J. Howard and be all right. So
But if you have Jordan Reed, one more week.
Yeah, one more week,
and
show
then,
it to us this week with this awesome matchup with a great situation considering the offensive line and the wide receiver core. Show us something, Jordan Reed, so we can feel good about starting you in our lineups.
Yeah.
So that's going to do it for part 1 of the Fantasy Football Podcast. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with nice full cold beers, and we're going to talk about the rest of these games. So come back and join us in a minute. All right, we are back with part 2 of the Week 10 Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. Steve had to head home, but I am still here with my main man, Robin. And weak man.
You heard me, Steve.
So we're going to start with one of these NFC North games. It's the Lions playing the Bears. Lions bring their horrible rush defense into this game, and the Bears, that happens to definitely be one of their strengths. Last week we saw Jordan Howard. He had 2 touchdowns. He played really well. And as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, Tariq Cohen was kind of a letdown. But the Bears are definitely a good offense. Trubisky's probably one of these quarterbacks that people has as their backup quarterback, and they're stuck deciding between him or Phillip Rivers or him and one of Deshaun Watson. But I think this is another good week to start him. Last week, he only had 135 yards and the 1 touchdown, the 1 interception, but their defense was playing so well. They had 2 defensive touchdowns. So, you can't really hurt him too much for his lack of production. But I think this week will be a little bit different. The Lions are actually pretty tough against wide receivers. They got Darius Slay, who's a great corner. And I can see him kind of shutting down Anthony Miller, who's become their best outside receiver. Taylor Gabriel and Trey Burton working in the inside. They run the different kind of routes. So Anthony Miller, I think, has become the number 1 there. But like I said, Darius Slay is a really good corner. So I kind of like Trubisky this week. Definitely like Jordan Howard. And I mean, if you've been riding Trey Burton, you can keep it going. Tight ends actually do pretty well against the Lions. They're giving up the 9th most fantasy points to tight end. So I think this is a week that you can actually start Trey Burton and actually feel confident with it. I know he's been letting people down for sure over the past few weeks. Today I saw the Lions cut Amir Abdullah and they signed Bruce Ellington. So how do you think that's going to affect Kerryon Johnson going forward? I mean, they already have a split backfield there with LeGarrette Blount and Theo Riddick, who does a lot of the work in the passing game. Do you think this is going to help any one of those running backs any more than any other? How do you see this working out?
I think possibly short term. Honestly, at the end of the day, I think when we have a running back by committee in this situation, I'm not crazy about starting any of these guys. At the end of the day, this week I can see Blount, right? You said
he's more like their goal line back.
Yeah, I can see Blount getting a little more production just because you can't trust a new running back off the street within your first week, and Blount's going to get those goal line carries. Plus, we're pretty partial to LeGarrette Blount up here in this neighborhood.
Yeah, it's true.
In Philly, unfortunately for our fandoms, we aren't. But yeah, no, I think LeGarrette Blount will have a good week. But I think as the season progresses, all 3 of them are going to see some good carries, and I wouldn't start any unless you absolutely need to.
Staying away from Matthew Stafford, hasn't really been playing well at all. Last week, he had 200 passing yards in a game that they were losing throughout the entire game. No good. No touchdowns, no good. And then these 2 wide receivers who obviously should benefit with Golden Tate being traded to the Eagles. And last week it seemed like Marvin Jones was the one who is in line to receive more of those targets. But it was an interesting matchup with him and Xavier Rhodes. Xavier Rhodes has been a shutdown corner throughout this entire season. And Marvin Jones was locked up with Xavier Rhodes throughout pretty much the entire game, and yet he still caught 6 of his 8 targets, which is pretty good against this dude. Xavier Rhodes is a beast. And Kenny Golladay was kind of a disappointment. I mean, with Golden Tate being traded, you would think that at least I would have thought that Kenny Golladay would be the one to have the bigger game between these 2, and it just didn't really work out for him. So I think both of them are okay wide receiver 2 starts, but I don't think either one of them will emerge as a wide receiver one for us in fantasy, just because of Golden Tate being traded. I think those targets are going to be spread out amongst the running backs as well as the two wide receivers. So looking forward to another NFC North game. We got the Packers at home against the Dolphins. I'm really hoping this is a get-right game for these Packers, especially Aaron Jones, who last week he had the 14 carries for 76 yards, which was awesome, but he had that one huge fumble that seemed to just completely kill the Packers' chance there. The Patriots went back down and scored right after, and the game was pretty much over. So that was real tough seeing, especially after they traded Ty Montgomery, and me amongst, I'm sure a lot of other people were super excited about him coming in and really taking that number one running back spot, and he wasn't really able to do it. I mean, that fumble is not gonna help his chances of getting more work. So we saw Jamal Williams he got 7 carries and 2 targets. He only gave you about 50-something yards, but he's definitely trusted in passing situations. So that's not good for Aaron Jones. Hopefully this game against the Dolphins, who give up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs, hopefully this is a get-right game for him and for Aaron Rodgers and for everybody else. We talked about it a little earlier about Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Last week had an awesome game, 100 yards on his 3 catches. He's averaging over 25 yards a catch. So for a dude who's obviously making these big plays and who's now in line to to get more volume with Geronimo Allison out, I'm super excited about him. Obviously, the majority of coverage is going to be drawn by Devontae Adams. So the combination of losing Geronimo Allison and Marquez Valdes-Scantling jumping in right into a wide receiver 2 spot, and it's Aaron Rodgers. So I'm super excited about the fact that I was able to get him last week before the game started, so I didn't have to worry about fighting over the waiver wire with somebody else. And Jimmy Graham actually had a really good game last week as well. He caught a touchdown, 55 yards on 4 catches. So should be a good game for him as well. So good all around for the Green Bay Packers for sure. Let's move on to some of these NFC East teams. We got for all you hometown Eagles over here. We got the Cowboys playing the Eagles, and Eagles defense has not been playing anywhere near as well as they have been, or at least as good as they did last year. They're giving up the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers, and now with Amari Cooper around, now the Cowboys have a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. So between him and Michael Gallup, I can see somebody having a good game here, especially if we think that the Eagles are going to jump out to an early lead and their Cowboys are playing from behind. Maybe they aren't able to focus on Zeke Elliott as much as they'd like to, kind of like what we saw last week. I mean, Zeke still had over 100 total yards, but they weren't able to really, get in front and grind out defenses with him.
Yeah, I think Zeke's absolutely going to have a week this week against the Eagles. They haven't been able to compete against some of these high-profile running backs, and even when they do stack the box, their corners can't keep up. So I think Zeke's going to eat for sure.
The Eagles give up the 7th fewest fantasy points to running backs. However, they give up the 4th most receptions and the 6th most receiving yards to running backs. So maybe this is a week where Zeke's used more in the screen game. Maybe they run those little Texas routes, as they're called, down in Dallas. So maybe not so much looking for him in a big way in the running game, but definitely in the pass game. And like I said, Amari Cooper, he's definitely going to be a focal point of this offense going forward. I don't think you trade a 1st-round pick midseason for a guy if you don't think he can jump in right away and produce as a number 1 receiver like you're trading for.
Yeah, absolutely. He's going to get those targets. We've just got to hope, and it's hard to see why, but for some reason, Dak, you don't know if it's the way he's programmed or if it's what he's been taught to be. He doesn't really have that gunslinger mentality that Romo used to have, and I think that's a blessing. I think a lot of Cowboys fans are happy about that, but Dak hasn't been throwing some of these deep balls that we used to see from Romo, and I think Amari kind of benefits from some of those throws, as we saw from Derek Carr. He used to let it loose. So I'd definitely like to see the Cowboys try and go over the top a little bit more and let Dak take a few more chances without being too incredibly risky.
Yeah, I mean, I think any team that has an offensive line like they do and a running back like they do, you don't take chances. Take your shots when they're there, but otherwise let your let your star running back be a star running back. You know what I mean? Looking at the Eagles, this Cowboys defense is actually really good, man. I mean, they're in the top 10 in fewest fantasy points allowed to all four of these positions here. Eagles coming off of a bye, which is obviously an advantage to them. They're at home. The Golden Tate trade to me is the thing to watch in this game. Obviously Darren Sproles, it was in practice on Wednesday, which is a good sign for him, and that's going to be another interesting thing to watch out for. But to me, it's figuring out how Golden Tate affects the rest of this Eagles team. Is he used in the slot and kind of pushes Nelson Aguilar out of the way, or is he used out wide to keep Nelson Aguilar inside? Does he work in the slot and kind of take away from Zach Ertz a little bit? Does he take away from the passing situations that the running backs used to be in? It's going to be a fun offense to try and figure out here. As all of us up here know from watching these Eagles, It's a fun offense that they run there. It's a fun offense to watch. And definitely some weapons on that team for sure.
And also looking at how Alshon's value might vary, as he's not double teamed as often, and maybe Carson can find him in some red zone targets that he couldn't find him in before, as kind of that solo big catch target.
That's a good point. Yeah, a couple weeks ago we were actually talking about Alshon Jeffrey's schedule going forward, and over the past couple weeks playing Janoris Jenkins with the Giants and playing Xavier Rhodes with the Vikings that 1 week. He still has some tough matchups going. Before their bye, they played Jacksonville, so he was on Jalen Ramsey all week, all game, and he was still producing though.
Right.
And maybe that's a factor as to why they made that trade, is because they said we need to take some pressure off of Alshon here, because a dude came off the PUP list, didn't play the first 3-4 weeks.
No, I think his first game back was actually against the Panthers.
Was it?
Yeah, that may have been a second game, which honestly he could have been the difference maker there if the Panthers hadn't hacked him at the very end for that pass interference call on the 20. I mean, I was at the game. I personally think he was going to make that catch and win the game for the Eagles. So that's one of those smart heads up. But yeah, he was dynamic in that game, and he can really be the difference maker if he stays healthy. But like you said, receivers, they kind of use his type of explosiveness. When they come back, we got to give him a little bit more time before we kind of call him fully back, I'd say.
I'm kind of staying away from all these running backs on the Eagles. I know a lot of people have picked up one or the other, throughout these past couple weeks with Jay Ajayi going down. But with Darren Sproles coming back, and obviously the fact that they didn't go out and trade for a running back, that they went and traded for a wide receiver when they already had, Nelson Aguilar and Jordan Matthews came back. That tells me something about how they feel about their running backs. And I think we're going to see again, like we saw last year, they're going to use all four of these guys when you consider Smallwood and Corey Clement that's already been playing. So with Josh Adams, the rookie, and with Darren Sproles coming back, it's going to be impossible to figure out which one of these guys to start. So I'm staying away from all those guys. Obviously, I think Wentz and Ertz are must starts. Ertz is, to me, a top two tight end. It's him and Kelsey to me right now. I think Gronk's kind of fallen out of that.
Yeah, unfortunately,
for whatever reason. Maybe we're finally seeing the diminishing of Gronk, and the empire is falling. But it's probably going to be a couple more years, because that's how it goes. But yeah, I mean, trying to figure out these running backs is going to be impossible. So stay away from them if you can. This next NFC East game, we got them going over, the Giants going to the 49ers. Giants coming off a bye, the 49ers coming off of that 34-3 beat down over the Raiders, where, as I said earlier, the Raiders made Nick Mullins look like Joe Montana. Breida had an awesome game again, considering the fact that every week he's got 3 different injuries. 12 carries for 44 yards. It's not awesome. It's not the best numbers you can get, but for a dude who, like I said, who every week seems to have something else wrong with him, he's definitely a tough dude. And like I said earlier, with Raheem Mostert going down, I think Breida's in line to hopefully, if he can get a little healthier, to be their true number one running back there. So I'm excited about him. And then obviously George Kittle had another awesome game. He's definitely he's in that tight end 2 tier that maybe next year he leaps into the 1 when Jimmy Garoppolo takes back over. And this dude, Kendrick Bourne, who I was kind of excited for this week after what he did 2 weeks ago, he caught that touchdown, but he only got the 2 targets. So I was looking for a little bit more from him. Didn't really give us much. Wasn't involved really at all, to be completely honest. But he did catch that touchdown, so that was good. And then looking at this Giants team, I just don't know what to make of them at all. Eli was already named the starter for this game, even though there was rumblings that he wouldn't. But, the backup quarterback there went and screwed up his chances by getting arrested on like a Tuesday morning. And then Saquon Barkley, like, if you have him, obviously you're riding him. Despite what happens at quarterback, despite how bad this Giants team is, you're starting him every week because he's that explosive and he does so much in both the run and the pass game. And then, Odell and Sterling Shepard, they both have a decent matchup here. The 49ers are giving up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So you'd think it's a good matchup, but we've seen them throughout this season have good matchups and do nothing. So definitely frustrating players for you, those Giants are. But maybe this is the week where they come out after a bye, get some time to, figure out who they are and go after a team that isn't all that great against quarterbacks and wide receivers. Maybe this is the week that we see this Giants team actually come out and show what we thought they would be, or at least what I thought they would be coming into the season with a true number 1 receiver, an awesome number 2 receiver, a great tight end, and a freaking bowling ball of a running back.
And Ingram has just yet to show up.
Yeah,
just
not at all.
Absolutely non-existent. I'm a Gronk team, unfortunately, and I signed Ingram when I needed to, and Gronk wasn't playing, and both of those guys have just been constant disappointments on the team. So yeah,
you thought coming into that season that combo of tight ends would be just
well, luckily I was able to get Ingram off the waiver wire. He disappointed someone else in my team too much, but yeah, Gronk in an auction league, I'm kicking myself so far. I won't make that mistake again.
So let's move over to the NFC West. We got the Seahawks playing the Rams. Rams coming off of that awesome game against the Saints. That might be the game of the year so far, if you ask me. And the Seahawks coming off of a loss to the Chargers. The Seahawks defense is actually really good, man. They're giving up the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. So I'm actually sitting Jared Goff if I can. Obviously, Todd Gurley's starting. He's a beast. Had another touchdown. You just keep scoring touchdowns. Mr. Touchdown, he is. And then Brandon Cooks had the better game of the 3 wide receivers. The 3 amigos over there in Los Angeles. 6 catches on 8 targets for 114 yards. Caught one of the touchdowns. Cooper Kupp had the other touchdown on 89 yards. And it was really good seeing him come back from what looked like a bad knee injury that turned out to not be all that serious, I guess, because he looked like he was totally fine. And then Robert Woods even had a decent game. 5 catches on 9 targets for 71 yards. You'll take that. Like, every week, 1, probably 2 of these wide receivers is going to have an awesome game, and every week 1 of them is going to have a somewhat disappointing game. I don't think any one of them is ever going to give you a complete stinker, but all 3 of them you have to play if you have them. They're probably locked in at one of your wide receiver 2 or flex spots. They're great. Keep playing them. Even against the Seahawks team that's given up the 10th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, you're still going to play them. They're the definition of you play your studs. As I mentioned earlier with the running back situation with the Seahawks, this Rams defense, they're giving up the 9th fewest fantasy points to running backs, but for whatever reason, these Seattle running backs have killed them. When they played each other in Week 5, both of them, this is Chris Carson and Mike Davis I'm talking about, both of them had 13 or more fantasy points. And whoever's going to start here, it seems like Chris Carson, this hip injury that he had that forced him to come out of the game last week, it's a re-aggravation of a hip injury he had coming into the season. And Pete Carroll had said that he didn't, on like Monday, I think he said, I don't expect Chris Carson to be doing much in practice this week, and to his word on Wednesday today, he didn't practice. So that's scary to me as a Chris Carson owner in one of my leagues. But thankfully, somehow I was I think I was 8th in waivers out of 12 teams, and somehow Mike Davis fell to me.
Wow.
Yeah. In a week where there really wasn't many other running backs at all to target on the waiver wire, he fell to me. So I'm really happy that I'm now able to handcuff him, and whichever one of these guys is going to start this week. And honestly, if both of them are active, I'll probably play Davis, because I'm not sure if Chris Carson could get through the entire game. But with either one of them, you can feel confident starting against these Rams because, like I said, week 5, they both ate. They both put up some good numbers. It's these wide receivers for the Seahawks that I'm staying away from. All 4 of them, they're just all very inconsistent, Tyler Lockett's had multiple touchdowns this season, but his yardage has never really been there. Doug Baldwin, his targets haven't been there, and he's been hurt and blah, blah, blah. But then again, they did have probably the best end zone celebration of the season so far. Maybe
no contest on that one.
Maybe Michael Thomas can have a disagreement there with his cell phone antics, but any tribute to Joe Horn is cool with me, I guess.
Yeah,
maybe not for you being a Carolina.
I mean, you got to respect history. Joe Horn haunts my dreams sometimes, but growing up, I always loved excessive celebrations, being a Steve Smith guy as well. And I feel like Joe Horn kind of started to pave the way for them, and then also started to pave the way for celebrations getting banned. So glad to have him back. I think that was the perfect tribute to Joe Horn and these celebrations being back. So
wait,
I can live with it.
They banned using cell phones after Joe Horn's celebration?
Well, Joe Horn led to the league ban, an excessive celebration. I believe this year is the first year back when they're able to do the team celebrations, and excessive celebration isn't called nearly as much. But yeah, Joe Horn had a huge part in them. It's kind of when they were like, oh, they're bringing props now onto the field. That kind of changed the game a little bit. There are a few Sharpies every now and again, but a cell phone was a different level.
Yeah, it's one thing to have T.O. dumping popcorn and dancing with cheerleaders, but
right,
can't be bringing cell phones and sticking them underneath the goalposts before the game.
I guess apparently we can now. I love it. This is America. It's awesome to see the league having fun again, though.
Yeah, man, it's a lot of fun like that. Their offense, Russell Wilson is so much fun to watch play football, but that offense is really not all that much fun to watch.
No,
they're just, especially now that they have these 2 really good running backs, they're just like grind them out and then they just take their shots. And yeah, so it's fun seeing out of nowhere all of a sudden we see this like awesome routine that they obviously worked on at some point. But yeah, that's all good to me. An interesting game here. We have the Cardinals playing at the Chiefs. Another one of these NFC West teams. Cardinals coming off of a bye, and the Chiefs coming off of this win against the Browns. The Cardinals are giving up the most fantasy points to running backs, which is why I have Kareem Hunt solidly in there in my daily fantasy lineup as my number 1 running back. I think he's going to have a great game. And David Johnson's actually got a really good matchup here too. So it could be a battle of these running backs here. The Chiefs are giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs, as well as giving up the 3rd most receptions and the most receiving yards to running backs. So I think both of these running backs are going to have big games. I think it could negatively affect all the receivers involved in this game, like Larry Fitzgerald. He probably won't be targeted as much as he would have been if David Johnson's down there just grinding it out and picking up yards on every carry. And I mean, Tyreek Hill, you can't ever sit him because of how explosive it is and how he can give you 3 touchdowns any week, no problem. And then Sammy Watkins, I think he's a viable play. I think he came out of the game a little early with like a foot injury or something. And if you're really struggling and you need a flex in a PPR league, I think you can get away with playing Watkins, but I'm sure you can find a better option if Tyreek Hill is out there fully active like we saw him last week. It was good to see after this groin injury that a lot of people were expecting him to miss a couple weeks. He still came out and he had a decent game. Didn't put up all the fantasy points that we're used to seeing him put up, but 4 catches for 70 yards ain't bad. And obviously, Travis Kelce, you're going to play him, no problem.
Yeah, and as a Sammy Watkins owner myself, one thing we got to watch out for is it looks like because of his foot injury, he didn't practice today. So hopefully tomorrow we'll get some more reports out of that camp. Those reports are coming directly from the Chiefs camp, so we'll have an update tomorrow, but we got to keep an eye on that.
Yes, definitely keep an eye on Sammy Watkins, his status going into that game. We're going to move over to the AFC West and 2 other teams in the division there with the Chiefs that are struggling to keep up with the Chiefs. Robin, I see you got some stuff to deal with, so I'm gonna take over here, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, man.
Thank you very much.
It was great having you.
It was a pleasure. Go Panthers.
Anytime you want to come back. So with these the Chargers and the Raiders, Chargers coming off of a big win, Raiders coming off of an embarrassing loss. Both of these defenses are not good. Chargers giving up the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And at the same time, I mean, I don't really see the Raiders really challenging them here. I think the Chargers are going to win big because the Raiders' defense is even worse. They're giving up 4th most to running backs and the 6th most to tight ends. So I see Melvin Gordon just beating these Raiders' defense up and having a huge game like we've seen him done a couple times this season. I see Phillip Rivers having a good game. Hopefully Keenan Allen can score a touchdown for the first time since week 1 here. And these Chargers number 2 and 3 wide receivers that they got, the Williams brothers, both of them scored a touchdown again last week. I think they're both decent flexes for you. So if you need a wide receiver there, I think you can feel comfortable playing either one against this Raiders defense. The one interesting thing for this Raiders defense is Jalen Richard. He has probably the best matchup of this game here for the Raiders. The Chargers are giving up the 6th most receptions and the 2nd most receiving yards to running backs, and obviously we've seen that. That's what Jalen Richard does. He's one of these pass catching running backs. And so if he's going to be used and if the Raiders are down and they need to throw the ball, I can see Richard picking up some big yardage. I'd stay away from Doug Martin if you could. I'd stay away from all these wide receivers for the Raiders too. I don't trust any of them in my flex. Jared Cook, I'd say yeah, but again, just this Raiders offense is just so inconsistent. I don't know who I can trust, who I can't trust. So. We're going to move on to the Patriots playing at the Titans. First one of these AFC East and AFC South games. The Titans are a very good defense. They're giving up the fewest fantasy points to tight ends, and we saw Gronk wasn't active last week, didn't play, and even if he does play this week, I don't expect much from him. He was in practice on Wednesday, which is a good sign for all you Gronk owners out there, but between him coming off of the injury and how good this offense looked last week without him, and the fact that the Titans giving up the fewest fantasy points to tight ends, I don't think the Patriots are in any rush to get him out there. So if he's not 100%, I don't think they're going to really take any chances with him. I'm looking at James White. He left the game early, but he was able to come back, and he was in practice on Wednesday, so that's a good sign. Last week he had the 2 touchdowns, and all these wide receivers that they have here, especially Edelman and Gordon, you're going to play either one of them if you have them on your roster. This is just too good of an offense to sit anybody, to be honest. And with Cordell Patterson coming in, getting 11 carries, he got that 1 touchdown, had 61 rushing yards. If Sony Michel is out again, and if you're really struggling at running back, I think it's not the worst position to be in, picking up a running back for the Patriots. They've shown us over the years that they can keep multiple running backs valuable in fantasy. And so yeah, I mean, if you're really struggling and if you see that Sony Michel is out, I think Cordell Patterson could be a decent pickup for you. It could be a decent 1 week replacement situation. The best matchup for the Titans here is Dion Lewis. As I said during my daily fantasy spot, he's got the 19 carries last week with 60 yards. He caught all 4 of his targets for 60 yards and a touchdown. He's clearly the best running back on that team, and hopefully they keep feeding him. Hopefully Derrick Henry doesn't chop into too much for him, and that kills me to say because I was super excited about Derrick Henry coming into the season, but just 6 carries. Yeah, one of them was on the goal line, and he was able to convert it for a touchdown, but just 6 carries. It's just... what a disappointment he has been all season. And going back to Dion Lewis real quick, the Patriots are giving up the 7th most receptions and the 4th most receiving yards to running backs. So this is another good week to play Dion Lewis for sure. Staying away from all these wide receivers here. The Patriots are giving up the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, so I wouldn't play any of these Titans wide receivers. And this is a great revenge game for Dion Lewis. So, again, play Dion and feel good about it. We got the Jaguars going to the Colts, 2 teams coming off of a bye here, 2 AFC South teams. Right before Robin left, he was able to drop this cool stat for me, which everybody knows I'm a big fan of. Since week 4, Andrew Luck has led the league in passing yards, which is pretty awesome. I know he's been in like the top 5 for pass attempts throughout the season as well, so it makes sense. And also we know how much he loves to spread the ball around to all of his targets. He's got a plethora of weapons there in Indianapolis. However, his schedule going forward is pretty scary. He's got Jacksonville, Tennessee, Miami, another game against Jacksonville in Jacksonville, and then Houston and Dallas. So we were talking a little earlier about, whether or not I should drop Andrew Luck in a league where I had him and Andy Dalton going into last week, both of them on a bye, and I decided to keep them both because I couldn't bring myself to drop Andrew Luck. I feel like any given week, Andrew Luck has the ability to be the number 1 quarterback. He has as much upside at quarterback as anybody because of how well he runs and because of obviously leads the league in passing yards since week 4. So I'm hoping I can hold on to him, and I'm hoping at some point I can start him and have him kill it for me like he does from time to time. And then looking at the Jaguars here, Bortles is just Bortles. I don't know what to say. The Colts are giving up the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, but I can't ever bring myself to start Blake Bortles. I think I'd start anyone on the waiver wire at this point over Blake Bortles. They obviously don't really have much faith in him. Sitting him 2 weeks ago, right before the bye, sitting him in the middle of the game. I don't know if it was just a message to him or what it was, but I'm staying away from him. I'm staying away from Leonard Fournette, as we talked earlier. Now with 3 running backs down there, even if he's active, in a pinch, if you have to start him at your flex, I guess you can. But to me, if I've been riding with him on my bench all season, I'm not starting him now. We don't know what we're going to get from him. Let's give him a week to see. The one player here that on the Jaguars that I think you can somewhat play confidently is Dante Moncrief. I think he's become the number 1 wide receiver there. He's definitely gotten the volume, and this is another one of these revenge games that are also so interesting for us. Always gives an extra little motivation there for these players. So, and besides Andrew Luck, really the only player on the Colts that I'm interested in playing in is 2 of them actually, is Marlon Mack and T.Y. Hilton. Max he's getting the volume, and it's not a great matchup, but he's getting the volume, so you're going to keep playing him. And T.Y., it's a bad matchup. Nobody's going to argue with that. The Jaguars are giving up the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but T.Y. is hard to sit, man. He averages 5 catches and 69 yards throughout his, I think it was 8 games, 7 or 8 games, career games against the Jaguars, but he's had plenty of touchdowns in that streak as well. 2 touchdowns. It was 6 games, 2 touchdowns over those 6 games. So it's not like he's going to go out there and give you a complete stinker, and he has that opportunity to explode for over 100 yards, which he's done. 3 times against them? Just twice against the Jaguars throughout his career. So you could play him, and you could do worse, is what I'm saying. And we're going to finish up part 2 of the podcast here, going with the Buffalo Bills against my Jets. Both of these teams coming off of embarrassing losses. The Jets were in an absolute pillow fight against the Dolphins last week. Nothing but field goals. And the Bills just got absolutely trampled over by the Bears. The Bears had those 2 defensive touchdowns. Nathan Peterman threw 3 interceptions, as he is to do. And it was just bad. So I don't know what to make of this game. I don't know if you can start anyone in this game.
It's just two bad defenses. Two bad offenses, and two defenses that aren't all that bad. I mean, the Bills are definitely way better. They're in the top 10 against quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. So really, the only Jets that have okay matchups is Isaiah Crowell and Elijah McGuire, who haven't done much over the past couple weeks, and neither of them have really gotten all that much work either. I mean, Isaiah Crowell got 13 carries last week for 50 yards, but nothing to get all that excited about. And maybe the Jets do try and run the ball, especially considering the fact that today on Wednesday, Sam Darnold, their quarterback, was in a walking boot with apparently a significant foot sprain. So, there was talks about actually sitting him after his 4-interception game last week, which I think is ridiculous. You're on a team that has 3 wins right now going into Week 10. You have a rookie at quarterback. Play the dude. But, I mean, if he's not going to play, that's even worse for these Jets. So there's honestly no one in this game that I would feel comfortable playing. The Jets do give up the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers, but, I mean, who on the wide receivers, or what wide receivers on the Bills scare you, and who of them gives you any confidence to play? The only one I can come up with is Terrell Pryor, just because it is a revenge game against these Jets who just cut him 3 weeks ago. So, if you're into that kind of thing, just chasing after revenge points, maybe this is the guy to throw into your lineup. But as a Jet fan, I am not excited about this game in any way. So that does it for part 2 of the Week 10 Dudes Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, I'd like to thank Steve and Robin, who were both able to come on and join us. They both had to leave a little early, but that's totally fine. Life gets in the way. So I'm happy that they were able to come on, and looking forward to next week. So we'll catch you guys next week. May the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents and be very, very pleasant to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. To listen to our episodes or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app, available on Android and iDevices, or visit us online at dudesnbeer.com. You can also find all of our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors, podcasts, and other content, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, drink responsibly.